The following video was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. Welcome to the Black Hat Briefings 1999. This meeting was held in exciting Las Vegas, Nevada from July 7th through the 8th. This is videotape number 32.
Becky Days, President and CEO of Infidel. I love the name. I love the email address. Infodad, we'll get it. That's sexist. I mean, that is really good. Becky used to be a co-worker at NSA. She's quite good in a variety of things. She has a better intro of herself than I do. She has been in NSA, so you could say ex-spook. I will see you at the end of the session. Becky?
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, Jack. I guess that Ira's view on the agency has now necessitated an obligatory disclaimer. I'm not one of those people he was talking about. I'm going to talk today about a kind of a curmudgeon's view about security, or the lack thereof, frankly, the lack thereof in a Microsoft world. So, in introduction, I don't know, always in these introductions, it seems that we get the same gloomy train of the same people over and over and over again, where there's sort of an evenness of quality. I don't know, try to be a little bit fun. So, as Jack indicated, I started out as a normal person. Nah, not a chance. Went to Spookdom, went to NSA in '84. And when I got to NSA, I actually did legitimate, wonderful security, systems development stuff, and said, no way on earth do I want to be a computer security person. And literally ran into a friend in the parking lot who snookered me into coming to work for the research group of the then NCSC. I hung around and actually enjoyed it. One of my first assignments was to bring down the intrusion detection research program, because nobody was ever going to do that stuff anyway, because they were all going to buy trusted systems. Actually got into it and discovered that it seemed to be a lot of potential in that particular area, at least to me. So I took it, and to my management's absolute horror, actually ran with it. And actually, we ended up doing, I believe, a lot of good work, and also had a great deal of fun. Among other things, I created a lot of the seed money that went to places like UC Davis, and like with Spafford's program, Sirius at Purdue. When '96, after things got a little bit too interesting at the agency, I was offered an opportunity to go learn how life in the trenches went in Los Alamos. So I went off as a deputy security officer for their computing division, where I got a serious curmudgeon's dose of what security in the trenches is really like. And it turns out that a theorist's view of computer security and an operational view are a wee bit different. From Los Alamos, I went to work briefly for EG&G at Area 51, and I'm afraid that just totally blew my cover. I mean, even my 10-year-old friends had all figured it out at that point. So I'm here to come clean. The obvious conclusion is I'm an alien. Let's just come clean. I could not have gone through that series of organizations without that being the case. I'm here also to give you a little bit of enlightenment. So are the rest of the really good folks in computer security. I think it takes, you don't have to be an alien to be good in computer security. However, I think to have an alien sort of outlook definitely helps. Yeah, hackers are just wannabes. They'll get there eventually. This explains, I think, to a certain extent, why security can be so incomprehensible to mere mortals. For those of you that are the heavy techies in the audience, I apologize in advance. This is seriously targeted toward folks who are trying to come at this from a strategy point of view. But also I'm hoping to give Microsoft an honest hammering as a means of sort of priming the pump for Microsoft to come in tomorrow and perhaps to present an adequate defense. We'll see. For starters, let's just tie down the notion of what we're talking about when I talk about computer security. Most people will sit up here and give you the blah, 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 blah. Security is this. It is an extremely formalized discipline in which we are concerned about confidentiality, integrity, availability. You know the deal. Nah. I want two really functional views. My two favorites are, first off, Cheswick and Bellavins, which says computer security is keeping anyone from doing things that you don't want them to do, either directly with or make things come from your computer or any peripheral device. So you don't want them not only munging with your system, you don't want them manipulating your network or network hardware, you don't want them messing with your printers or other peripheral devices. The other favorite view is from Spath and from Sims and Garfinkel, which says that security is the property that specifies that a computer will behave the way that you expect it will. Well, actually, it turns out, after apologizing for using those views for a long time, I got into the trenches, and frankly, you want to know the real picture of security right now. It's a dance with chaos. You're in a situation where you're trying to deal with change that goes on, very frankly, in real time, all too real time. If you're dealing with any but the most trivial environments, you've got networks that are growing daily. You may have situations where you have the local guru, do-it-yourselfer, who may overnight just take on a wild whim, decide to put another system on your computer by just snaking a cable and not bothering to tell anyone about it. There are a lot of things that you end up having to deal with in the security realm that are things that, I don't know, a lot of textbook approaches don't even begin to touch. As a way of kind of laying the foundation for a discussion of my bones I have to pick with Microsoft, let's talk about from an etiology point of view. I have a kind of seriously fuzzy, but I don't know, somewhat helpful infrastructure for dealing with categorizing security problems from the driving cause. First off, everyone I think is very familiar with the fact that problems in software design and implementation create security problems. This basically goes for any sort of problems, error, flaws, omissions, et cetera, that result in the process of actually designing, conceptualizing, and implementing security. In software products. The second category is that you have problems in system configuration and management. And here I'm talking about problems that arise primarily once you shrink wrap, make the decision to shrink wrap and send them out to customers, once your alpha and beta tests are done. Finally, and this is sort of the stickiest wicket, and I think holds the key to a lot of security, are problems involving misplaced trust. Well, as our first category of problems we're going to look at, let's look at problems in the software design and implementation. Got loads and loads and loads and loads of examples. Unfortunately and very frustratingly, a lot of these were articulated very clearly in a series of studies in the 70s. They remain the same. You have problems in terms of the formulation of sound requirements. And here you have situations where people are putting out products where they don't really understand the richness or have not adequately contained the notion of their target users or target user environments. You have problems that occur trying to map those requirements to designs. So you have designs that perhaps kind of go awry, that don't implement a requirement in the way that the user or the requiring person actually laid forth the requirement. You have problems mapping that design to implementation. And these are things where effectively you're talking about leakage at each stage of these mappings. You go from rather formalized, perhaps more abstracted views of what a piece of software is supposed to do versus what the product as built does. Finally, problems in implementation. These are typically QA problems. These are sort of the does that really ought to be corrected by the time a piece of software hits a customer. However, our mileage has seriously varied on this. The second category of problems are problems in system configuration and management. Here you have problems that occur after you field the system that affect the manageability, affect the security state of the system in fielded situations. Here, and this is the one that nails us over and over and over again, are problems with inappropriate default configurations. You got problems in terms of expectations of folks. When you have a bug, when you understand perhaps if you're a vendor and you expect that people are going to have to install bug patches, but you make that patch arrangement so difficult and so arcane and so obscure that people never ever get around to doing it. You have problems with training and awareness levels of users and administrators. Finally, you have problems in matching appropriate products to environment. This is sort of a customer effort. However, I think that there are cases in which extreme marketing can represent an issue. Finally, as I said, one of the stickier wickets is problems involving misplaced trust. In this realm, you have problems in protecting the environment. You have problems in missing or inappropriate policies. And in some cases, I think some pieces of software that you field really ought to be bundled with some recommendations as to how to fold these in or how to interpret these in local policy. And you got problems in inappropriate prioritization of securities and organizations. This is rather a macro view. I think that there are a lot of organizations that really ought to know better that decide that, well, you know, we can afford not to have to worry about security. I don't think anymore in business that you can afford that particular view. I think probably the thing that rounds it up the most is that the problems in this trust category encompass problems in assuming trustworthiness when there is no compelling evidence to support that assumption. And boy, if there were ever the key ring to hell in security, this is it. Okay, now we have our friends from Redmond appear on the scene. Currently, by most estimates, generally accepted estimates, Microsoft owns over 80% of the U.S. operating system market. You know, like it, don't like it. I'm not particularly crazy about that. This is the way it is. What probably amplifies my concerns in the security arena are the fact that so many of those operating systems also carry the Office baggage. Those apps typically are fielded and populate most of those OS seats. Microsoft, because of that dominance in the operating system arena, drives the majority of the application software business and is a steadily increasing presence in e-commerce. You worried yet? I got problems in software design and implementation. Remember that these are things that occur during the build of the system. These problems increase with system complexity. These are sort of the rules of thumbs that we know, the heuristics we know from the years in which we actually have addressed computer security issues. You know that system complexity typically increases with code size. Code bloat is bad. I mean, it's just any way you look at it, any way you slice it, code bloat's going to create a lot of security problems. Let's take a look at Windows NT. NT 3.1 came out at I don't know, what I considered outrageous, but what others might consider perfectly legitimate 6.5 million lines of code. With NT 3.5, it increased to 10 million lines of code. 4.0 took that to 16.5 million lines of code. Microsoft says that NT 2000 is running currently at 29 million lines of code. Their competitors say that the actual number is somewhere between 45 and 65 million lines of code. I think we got a little bit of a problem here, folks. It's a specific example. Yes?
Can you quantify the top number? Can you give us a reference on that? Who are these people?
There, I've seen these in terms of, and there's a certain amount of contention there. Sun, I believe, has been one of those that has guessed more towards the 65 million lines of code.
Please repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was the sources for those vinyl, for the 65 million lines of code, 50 to 65 mil. Basically, Sun and other folks like that. And I did qualify. Sun, Novell, I believe, was another.
How would they know? How would they know?
Good question. Good question.
Does that number include services, or is that the size of the kernel app?
I'll happily, if you want to come talk to me after, I'll happily provide you my sources. Okay. First example, problems in this arena are buffer overflows. This is in Sun's Internet Information Service, which is Microsoft's web server package. This affects it running on Windows NT, Service Packs 3 through 5, and it was reported at the beginning of June, reasonably current problem here. ISAPI is Microsoft's replacement for Common Gateway Interface, CGI, which is basically the programming environment that allows you to add some dimensionality to web pages. It allows you to take web pages from being static information documents, and it kind of increases your ability to traverse that tree into something a little bit more valuable from an economic point of view. It allows you actually to provide some interactivity between your user and your website. ISAPI also has a problem in that it doesn't do proper bounds checking of things passed to it. When it handles requests to change password settings via the .htr files, overflows occur. This overflow crashes IISs, which allows you basically a shell on the system, and that allows you remote access. And in most cases, IIS runs at administrator level of privilege, so you mess the server, you end up with operating system access at privilege level. This is not good. They get bonus points from this one because also it doesn't log the events leading up to the problem. So you have a situation in which you've got a web server that crashes, in some cases with really disastrous security effects. You also have no way of being able to isolate what was an incidental crash from a deliberate crash. This is trouble. Another example of a problem that occurs in this, it's another buffer, yet another buffer overflow. Windows Outlook Mail utilizes 5,000 character buffer space for incoming messages, no bounds checking. You could send it a very interestingly crafted message. It overflows and it crashes and it takes Windows with it. You can also execute remote commands basically by doing a variant of a stack smash in which you craft the message that you send to Outlook such that when it crashes, it also executes interesting things. Now, part of it is not to isolate Microsoft unfairly. Let's try to be even-handed here. Part of what's happening is not only Microsoft, but the software industry as a whole. I think that there's a change of culture that's gone on in software industry as a whole. Things that normally in the past would have gone out as an alpha at best now go out as shipped product. There's no notion of confining error-ridden software. The notion of QA, and part of this is incidental to the size of the code being delivered. And I think in some lacks that we've had in getting QA technologies to keep up with I guess, the speed of delivered products. On the other hand, can we hold off for a bit? Let me get to a break point. Think about it. Right now you have a culture in which you've got immense scheduling pressures. You get a lot of encouragement of hyper work days. In the Valley, it's almost considered de rigueur. If you're going to be in a software startup, you're going to spend a whole lot of time working, in some cases sort of insane hours. Top priority is your time to market. It's not necessarily in features or whatever. You get a whole lot of pressure on that, and that actually determines your projections for profitability as well as your valuation. In most cases, and this is just there again, the demographics of the workplace. You've got really, really transient development staff. You've got lots of turnover. You literally have situations when people will leave work one day and drive up the street and report for work 2 doors up the next. In Microsoft's case, I don't know, I really, really have to find fault in the proliferation of Easter eggs. If Easter egg code can be fit into a product, what on earth can I say about the limitations, about the controls placed on the rest of the product? So this is not a trust-sparing situation. Does it sound like a controlled development environment to you? am I hopelessly stodgy in this? The next category of problems are problems in system configuration and management. This basically has to do with sloppy configurations of ship systems. It also has to do with unrealistic expectations of user populations. You get challenges in keeping programs and systems running are a big issue right now. I think we deal with a great deal of that. Everyone sees the reports on NT. This has also reflected the experience of way too many of my clients. If you can't manage them, basically, you're not going to keep them protected. You also have difficulty in managing the security that drive a lot of frustration with users, and also in a lot of cases, you have security mechanisms that are so arcane and difficult to use that the temptation to bypass them and circumvent them is pretty strong. So there again, this is trouble. Example that I consider that falls into this category that's come out, another problem that's come out of Microsoft lately is the showcode.asp. ASP is an active server page. This was reported in early May. IIS 4.0 ships with sample files. This also occurs in the Internet Server product. It ships with sample files to describe active server pages. They want folks to be sold on the concept of using this, and they're a wonderful and terrifically sexy feature. On the other hand, Showcode ASP is designed to show the source code. It's a test program that's fielded to show the source code, allow you to inspect source code for those ASPs via the web browser. It's shipped misconfigured. So that anybody with a web browser can use this routine to view any text file on the server. In situations where you've got information residing on a web server that you may not want folks to inspect, and this can occur particularly at the low end of the user market. A lot of e-commerce sites are run on such a shoestring that they tend to keep things perhaps they shouldn't on their web servers. It's just big trouble. Another example that falls in this category is the cache manipulation problems. This occurs in NT4, Service Pack 4. NT has a system-wide cache of objects that it uses to optimize the dynamic link library handling. It really seriously speeds it up. The caches, unfortunately, are created by default with everyone access. Promiscuous access settings. Any users can replace them with Trojan horses and take over basically insert your own pointers at will. That allows you to take over the system at the administrator's privilege level. Another great fun is with Site Server 3.0, which is the product that allows you effectively to organize intranets. Corporate intranets is the design target here. It's shipped with a sample demo directory for the ad server. The sample and demo directory is actually default installed with a default. If you buy the product and do install the default version, this is put in. It there again is shipped with bad permissions, rather promiscuous permissions. It contains a particular configuration file that contains user IDs and passwords for the SQL server database that backs it up. Anybody with a web browser can access that database with this particular URL. It's customized to the site. So, good news, and we have bad news. Good news is that this category of problems, the management category problems, the configuration missetting and so forth, actually lend themselves well to a lot of the current commercial security product solutions. Vulnerability assessment packages, a lot of the scanners actually do a very, very nice job of checking for these problems. And so they're manageable, which is very, very, very helpful. So, You still need an appropriate understanding. Remember, if you're talking about this from a corporate strategist point of view, you still need an understanding that the problem exists, that the exposure is there. Understand that perhaps that the price that you pay for utilizing the products is that you invest in the vulnerability assessment packages and other pieces of security management tool. In this case, too, though, because of these, an inept or overworked administrator can cost you a lot of money as a business person. So we get to my favorite category, the problems involving misplaced trust. And we'll revisit this. This involves a wide range of problems. It has to do, in most cases, I think that there ends up being a bit of a holy war in security circles as to where one draws a security perimeter. Frankly, I think anyone who does not include the user, at the very least the administrators inside that security perimeter, are only deceiving themselves. You have to establish that you can trust the personnel who run your systems. You got problems there in terms of missing or inappropriate policy. Effectively, when you're dealing with policies which ought to be reasonably static, driven by a little bit shorter life procedures, which then drive very, very dynamic practices. If you don't specify that something is of concern, and actually prescribe measures for dealing with it, but also measuring enforcements with those means of dealing with the problems. You're setting yourself up for a flaw. This is a classic. Any parent with a teenager knows this one, but you didn't tell me not to do that. You got problems this is more of a strategy, a corporate strategy problems. You have problems in inappropriate valuation of security in the organization. And you've got to be able to, as a corporate strategist, you've got to be able to say, okay, this is a legitimate concern, and I'm willing to go and fight the good fight with the bean counters and say we must spend a certain amount of money, we must have a certain amount of funding that we can spend on dealing with the security issues. And those bucks come down to being able to fund perhaps the extra time it takes to train the administrators, to outsource, so hopefully this is a favorite in the audience, to outsource security solutions, to make the right decisions, to do the right thing. And there again, the seminal concept here is that you got to be really, really careful about assuming trustworthiness unless you have really strong and compelling evidence to support that particular decision. Okay, and here, and most of these trust issues really nail you in protocol flaws, protocol implementation issues and networks. A lot of network problems are kind of rolled up in this particular category. Example is a RIF problem. A RIF is in routing information field. Occurs in token ring, NT40, service pack 3 levels. In token ring networks, when the frame goes through a gateway, you basically have this field that the gateway updates that keeps up with a variety of things, a variety of information about that traversing packet. If the RIF count goes above 7, the TCPIP stack crashes. Furthermore, if the token ID fields are duplicated, same effect. So you've got effectively a really brittle network TCP/IP stack mechanism here. You nail this, and it will nail not only the system to whom the frame is addressed, but every other system on the ring. Let's talk about the gotchas here in terms of the trust. First off, you got a situation where the system trusts other network hosts to send packets in compliance with the protocol standard. The protocol standard, just because it's a standard doesn't necessarily mean it is intact, wonderful, whatever. You have to, I believe, make some judicious decisions about how you locally enforce that protocol standard, and furthermore, how you deal gracefully with violations of the standard. No signs of that being done here. All the network systems on the broadcast medium trust other network hosts to send only well-formed packets. Trouble here. You know, it's wonderful to have that trust. It's a lot more helpful to trust and then take some means of enforcing it. It's one of these arrangements where you have the finger pointing going like this. I believe that everyone all the servers on each end of the transaction expect something else to do the checking, and subsequently the checking never gets done anywhere. If you don't check for the violations, you have no way of assuring a graceful exit. You'll have failures, and have miserably messy failures. So this is a system reliability issue as well. Now, in defense of Microsoft, the standard says the hop count should under no circumstance exceed 7. On the other hand, I think that whenever you have that, whenever you see in any standard or anything like that, any verbiage that says cannot, will not, must not, etc., you'd best be in a situation where you check to make sure that that condition holds. Got problems in Windows 95 and 98, just so that the Win 95 and 98 crowd don't feel neglected here. Win 95, 98, the good news, it uses crypto to deal with, to authenticate challenges, basically in terms of doing their server messaging. The bad news is they reuse the challenges for about 15-minute blocks. Someone sniffing that network traffic can grab and reuse the user authentication within that window. Effectively, what they do is they can grab your attributes that allow you to look at shared files. So it allows you to actually allows someone who puts a network sniffer out there, and it's not a hard thing to do, to have a great deal of fun within a 15-minute. 15 minutes forever in network time. You could do a whole lot of fun in that period of time. The gotchas here, in terms of what I consider the problems, the flaws in trust. First is the assumption that nobody's going to put anything of value and use file sharing on a Windows 95 or 98 machine. This is seriously flawed, unfortunately. The problem is that your adversary is not going to sniff the network traffic on the segment, and I think that assumes a certain level of trust, I guess, of the inviolability of the network length that simply doesn't hold anymore. I'm not particularly happy saying that, but this is the real world, guys. Final problem is that the crypto algorithm is strong, but key management is irrelevant to protection. A bit of a rant. Those of you who sat in on Bruce Schneier's lecture this morning, this is a classic crypto problem. That is, you can't confuse the strength of the cryptography, which is the strength of the algorithm itself, with the strength of the cryptology, which includes issues such as key management. You find yourself in a situation where perhaps you've invested in a wonderful case-hardened lock that either has key it's so simplistic that an adversary can look at it and replicate it visually, or else a key that is duplicated so much and the duplicates spread around that anyone can come up and pick it and utilize it. You've got to be able to pay attention to how you key these mechanisms. I have another little problem in TCPI in terms of how NT 351 and 4 handle in TCPIP bind permissions. It turns out that any user can bind to any network port on these systems. And the bigger problem is that if you beat a legitimate service to binding that port, you can crowd them out. You can basically nullify their access to that port. Can we spell denial of service here? Therefore, you can have any user, I mean, boy, talk about this on bad hair days at the office, woo-wee. You know, one fight with the net administrator can really mung the operations of the company for that day. So the problems here, let's look at the problems in terms of the mistrust here. Problem is no user would have any interest in binding to a port they didn't have a functional need to. Oh my goodness, if I heard this one. Many. This is the rhetoric that was going around portions of NSA in the early 80s, still probably there. The assumption is that if you wouldn't think to do something that no one else would, you know, we have an entire conference, I believe, that's centered around disproving that particular notion. Second problem in trust is no user would ever have any reason to shut down any network service. Okay, next. I think the underlying is that we can trust all users to behave in an appropriate fashion. And now for something totally different, but I think even scarier. All those problems assume rather classic system models. They assume, for instance, that programs remain programs and that data remain data. And that's really helpful if you're trying to look at things from a security perspective, because it gives you a certain semantics of cause and effect. And so it lends some order to this, some intuitive order. This is now run head-on into the advent of mobile code. And what mobile code is that mobile code is basically code that is wonderfully powerful in that it allows you to shift on a bit from content to executable and back again. The only problem is that the macro capabilities this provides you also have its own set of threats. So I have another bone to pick on this one. The two primary entries in the mobile code arena for development platforms are Java, which was a Sun product, and ActiveX out of Microsoft. The two models, competing models here, is that Java says we recognize that that having executable content represents a security problem, and therefore we're going to provide a technical fix for addressing this. That is, we're going to give you a Java sandbox, which is a containment vessel, a protected memory, a protected memory space within your operating system that will contain the execution. Well, it doesn't work reliably. On the other hand, intentions are, at least the intentions are there. Microsoft says, oh, we realize this is a problem. However, users are intelligent. All of our users are exceedingly intelligent, and they will be able to tell what things they want to execute and what they don't. Are users omniscient? Are you crazy? My users never have been. In some ways, you have to have sympathy for folks in the security arena, because if what you've got is a situation where all of our notions of illness are bacterial. We understand bacterial stuff great. We've got all our antibacterial things. The only problem is that the threats are viral right now. I mean, the threats basically deal with things at such a fine level of granularity in the system that a lot of the concepts that apply beautifully to bacteria just aren't quite there anymore. A lot of things that apply to us in terms of classic threat don't work quite as well. What I think is going to have a real interesting business impact is that I believe that this category of problems represents real trouble for folks who are expecting in the future to be digital content providers. And this is one of the backbones of, I think, of an evolving web economy. If you're in a situation where you are serving up digital content, this ups the ante for you in terms of sanitizing that content. But furthermore, it ups the ante in terms of the protections you have to place, not to keep bad guys from nailing you, but for being able to disprove that you didn't nail someone else. And I think this casts a whole different angle on security imperatives within business. Problems everywhere. If I haven't touched on your favorites, I apologize here. I think that you guys get another instantiation of back orifice later in the DEF CON conference. These examples, unfortunately, also don't even begin to scratch the surface. Neither do Melissa and Worm Explorer, .explore zip, or anything else that you've seen in the media, publicized in the media, and perhaps have had to suffer through yourselves. Got lots of threat, risks, and potential for loss. This is the economy. Then again, this is keeping you. The problem is that they also distract you from worrying about your real management problems in your organizations. In the interest of fairness, I think also that they could put forth the 2 cents worth in terms of the things that help. I think that there needs really to be a push for better software quality. We're probably at the same place in the software industry as consumers, that consumers are in for the auto industry, in the days before universal seat belts. Where the mortality rate associated with automobile crashes was way, way up there. I do believe in consumer activism on this count, and I do believe that the stakes are high enough that it's worth some placing some consumer advocate energy against the problem. I think that we really, really do need to push the envelope technologically for helping folks out quality control that doesn't drive their cost up unduly. And also, I think that quality control really does need to check things we know are problems from a security point of view. Like I said, a lot of the basic problems that we see that roll out in security contexts now are problems that we've known about for over 20 years. I think it's time that even performing QA against those attributes probably makes a lot of sense. I think that the only chance we have for security as wraparounds to systems is security that comes in the form of embedded, transparent, ubiquitous protections. I agree with Jim Litchko in terms of his take on sailor-proof protection. I think that if users basically don't have that option, and in a lot of cases they wouldn't choose not to exercise the protective stance, I think that the chances of getting security, particularly over broad scales, is a lot greater. You need systems that are easier to manage. The easier they are to manage and keep running, the more energy that people have to dealing with the exceptions. That's my personal crusade. I think that we still need more research dollars in security, but furthermore, I think that the dollars that are there need to be better spent. And finally, to bring it full circle, I think that there needs to be better security and training, education and training, and I think this needs to go broad scale. I think that it needs to go in the designer and developer populace as well as in management circles so that it gets the proper attention. So I got a few things. I threw in for Jollies a couple of resources. These are my personal favorites. Your mileage may vary. First is the excellent site that Gene Spafford maintains at Purdue in the Sirius project. Second favorite is the SEC Lab at UC Davis. It does a lot of work. They tend to be intrusion detection centric, and I'm intrusion detection centric, so I think they do a very, very nice information site. NT Bug Track for NT and Microsoft Specific and Loft and Root Shell all do a very credible job of tracking bugs that are reported by the other side of the trench. In terms of book, if you are book-oriented or have failing monitor eyes, as I do, the first and favorite thing, if you're going to deal in the Unix security arena at all, you need to have Spaff and Simpson's book. It's just an encyclopedia volume if you're going to work in security. Bruce Schneier's Applied Cryptography book is actually amusing because I think that if you make the round of the crypto circles at NSA, you're going to find a copy of that book on most desks. Should tell you something. Ches and Steve Bellovin's book on firewalls and internet security remains a classic as well, immensely readable. And if I can plug my own, I have a book coming out at the end of the year from Macmillan that is, there again, very intrusion detection centric, but covers some of the broader issues of etiology of security problems as well. So now, questions?
I was just underestimating some of the stuff with the code and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You see, even given like 35 million lines of code, a lot of code is not in previous versions. So even though you may have 20 million lines of code in NT4 or 16 million lines, a lot of that code was not reused in 2000. They chucked a lot of it and started over again on quite a few systems.
Yeah.
So you don't have evolved systems like you do in a lot of the other OS worlds. So it's just a lot of problems, plus you got applications that tend to get into the kernel and the OS to make changes. I mean, that's fundamentally bad security.
Yeah, singing to the choir here. Now, the complexity. I can remember people ringing hands over back end. Anyone remember back when we had a crash of switching system 7? I guess when switching system 7 for the phone systems crashed, that would have been in the early 90s. And I can still remember the investigators going after saying, we're going to isolate this problem, and being totally freaked because the code size at that point was like 1.75 million lines of code. And here we're talking about orders of magnitude off. It's spooky scene, and I'm in sympathy. I mean, having to deal with that, with a code base that grows that quickly in such a competitive environment is very difficult. I'm not in any way asserting that this is a very easy thing and it's trivial and Microsoft should do that. On the other hand, I think that there are things that there are things that need to do that. Sorry.
Let's use Microsoft as an example of code growth. If you looked at a similar rate of code growth in, say, for example, Linux or any other operating systems, last time I checked, the Linux distribution now comprised several CDs that used to take up less than I used to be able to download them. And, on a 28K modem in a reasonable period of time. And now that's ridiculous. And also, I've been involved in developing a number of applications, and it seems that they never ever grow smaller. That users always want more functionality, and that somehow or another I'm always forced to add more lines of code to support that functionality. So it seems to me to be an endemic problem that everyone has to face, not just any particular vendor.
Yes, it's inherently a forward chaining situation. Agreed. What is it? One of the laws of systems engineering says that what a can of worms once open will never ever fit into the same amount of space. Yes.
This does seem to be endemic in the software industry. Is it completely endemic? Is anyone doing it right? Do you have any examples of?
Is anyone doing it right? Beg pardon? Infidel, hopefully. No, we don't write operating systems. Actually, in some ways I've seen, well, actually, some of the versions of BSD, is it OpenBSD, I believe, was supposed to be coded where they shook out at least these nominal issues. I'm seeing some improvement too. We've had several things in the research world where we've come up with very specific, for instance, QA tools, onesies that would look for the most prevalent problems for certain categories of application code. For instance, we did kind of a custom job for Eric Allman and the gang at SendMail at some point in the past that they utilized and were able to shake 4 or 5 bugs, ahead of the reporting populace. So there, you have very tiny spot successes. But I consider this one of the major problems of this generation of technology, technologists. Yes, sorry, time-wise. One more, we can go.
I wanted to point out something that also Microsoft, they're looked at by a lot more people to try to break it in the lab versus other operating systems. You got all these people out looking at that source code, and just fair.
Good point. Yes, the leader. Finally, we're okay? Okay, thank you very much.